people start saying, well, what's your goals? And, a lot of things in life are easier said than done. But when it comes to leadership goals, sometimes it's easier done than said. So you ask a leader to just say, just bottom line for it, boss, like, where are we going? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And you get these stories and these long exhortations. And that's all understandable because, the goal is usually what's clear in our head. And to achieve it, you have to develop your plans. But if you leave that goal fuzzy and you try to use the task as a substitute for describing the destination, that's like trying to describe where you want to go on vacation by describing how the alternator and the carburetor works on your car.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities.
Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we're going to continue part 3 of our 4-part series on looking at the fundamental skills of vision. How do you see it? How do you say it? And how do you get after it? So in this part, we are continuing on our journey from the trends that we're able to see and be able to respond to that we talked about in our first episode, going to the long-term mission, vision, purpose, however you want to characterize that, with some skills to be able to declare our identity and plant where we want our ultimate flag to be in that changing environment. And then we're going to zoom into something that's kind of in the middle. I'm skipping over a few things. There's strategic goal categories, maybe a balanced scorecard type of an approach. You have all these other tools that could potentially bridge you between your mission and your activities. But in the middle is a great little tool called OKRs. OKR stands for Objective and Key Results. And in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what they are, give you some practical tools for using that on a micro scale, and a little bit about scaling it up to the macro. When you get into the billion-dollar organizations, it gets more sophisticated and complex. But for most of us out there, that's not our problem. So I want to give you something that you can use to translate from your long-term aspirations into your more short and middle-term aspirations to give you a way to be very clear and coherent and compelling in how you articulate those. So let's take a closer look at the history of OKRs. OKRs, really, the term was coined by Andy Grove back in 1975. So it is an oldie but goodie. It's been around for a while. It started at Intel, which is where Andy was at the time, and was really thinking about, how that marketplace was rapidly evolving in the early ages of high tech, and how did you focus on all the many wonderful things that you could be looking into to evolve your technology stack versus the things that were most essential for you to do, and how do you focus on that, and then how do you really measure what you're going to get? And so OKRs at their most basic has remained unchanged. They're essentially a way of articulating what is it that you want to get and how will you know if you got it. The objective is what do you want, and the key result is how do you know you got it. From there, though, it evolved and became really the seed management tool. It's a variation of management by objectives, but the seed tool that was used at places like Google and a bunch of other Silicon Valley startups with John Doerr and all his work, and that he was a colleague of Andy Grove's back at Intel, and then ended up kind of becoming the Johnny Appleseed, as it were, of OKRs and spreading how to not overcomplicate goal setting and planning, but still making it very purposeful and focused. And so it went through its heyday in Silicon Valley to help in the rapidly scaling organizations there. And then in the 2010s, started branching out into some nonprofits and other private sector industries as a very practical and useful tool for setting those interim goals to be able to guide and focus your teams. And then has now started reintroducing itself into some public sector agencies as well that are looking to be more targeted, more efficient, more effective with who they're serving and how we know that we're achieving the goals that we set. So that's a little bit of the background there. But again, at its simplest, it's simply a way to articulate an aspiration and be able to quantify progress against it. So let's take a closer look at OKRs, and we're going to look at it in the syntax of, you're leading a small team, 10 to 20 people, which is our target audience here, and you're trying to translate these long-term strategies, these long-term goals. Sometimes I refer to them as these giant steaming piles of aspirations that you're trying to make sense of for your team. And how do I bridge that? How do I translate and communicate it? So an objective is the qualitative statement of the desired direction. And really it's meant to describe the destination or the outcome that you want to achieve. Short, sweet, compelling, clear, in terms of it's articulating, hey, that's the direction that we're trying to go. And then the key result is a 1 to 2 or so quantified measurement, preferably in a continuous measurement, but we'll talk about some binary options as well there, that kind of gives you feedback if you're along the way and if you've indeed achieved it. Now, with that particular context, there's a syntax and a structure of the OKR. So we'll give you guys some practical tips on how do you create those so you're not getting caught around the axle with the word salad. I mean, people start saying, well, what's your goals? And a lot of things in life are easier said than done, but when it comes to leadership goals, sometimes it's easier done than said. So you ask a leader to just say, just bottom line for it, boss, like, where are we going? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And you get these stories and these long exhortations or these, detailed explanations or these specific action task plans. And that's all understandable because, the goal is usually what's clear in our head, or at least it's presumed to be understood. And to achieve it, you have to develop your plans. And so we're talking about our tasks and our sequences and our activities and who's got to do what, when. And those plans are really, really important. But if you leave that goal fuzzy, then you try to use the task as a substitute for describing the destination. That's like trying to describe where you want to go on vacation by describing how the alternator and the carburetor works on your car. Like, yeah, that's what's going to get you there. But where are we going for our family vacation? So when you're looking at your objectives in this context, it's also trying to help you narrow down the time horizon. So generally speaking, you're not talking about OKRs in terms of 3, 4, 5, 10-year increments. I mean, there's potentially a scenario for that. But in the practical case, we're usually looking at a quarterly time frame. So we're thinking it's something that's about 3 months. It's possible you can do 1 month. But it's about a time frame of a quarter where you want to be able to set a particular aspiration or objective and then get after it and measure some results. That's not to say you can't keep the same objective for multiple quarters. In fact, it's very typical for an objective to have a half-life of 6 to 18 months, and you have those incremental key results along the way. But that's the typical time horizon. They're not meant to be these evergreen, like always and forever. Which leads to the third point, which is OKRs are also meant to be the vital few versus the virtuous many. In any organization, you might have 4 or 5 things that on the whole you need to continue to monitor, right? Customers got to be happy. Production processes have to be sustainable. You got to keep an eye on your resources and your finances, and you got to make sure your employees are engaged. So those are like evergreen categories of health. Like using an individual example, it's like, okay, hey, it's my mental, my physical health, my spiritual health, all those are important. Or my family, like all the members in my family, right? Us being able to work well, play well, pray well, all those things are important. And that's true. They all are all the time. But at certain seasons, certain aspects rise to the top. Certain aspects are a little bit more relevant. In a family example, maybe you're going through a really challenging time with a healthcare challenge with a family member, right? And so it's not that all the other things don't matter at all right now, but just in that moment, that matters most. So we're going to concentrate our attention and our efforts around that thing, recognize that maybe some other aspects, maybe take a little bit of a second beat. On your personal side, right? Maybe your balance is really, off and you want to concentrate on it. Or maybe your cardio health, you've taken it for granted. So you're going to put a little more, maybe it's your nutrition, right? So again, all those things matter, but some of them matter most for a particular season. And similar with your business, right? Yes, customers, employees, finance and operations, those all matter all the time, but at different seasons, some of those matter most. So an objective is a way of saying, hey, in all the noise, you guys, collectively, this is the thing that is our critical constraint. This is the thing that is most consequential. This is the thing that's most time sensitive to this season. And we want to make sure that we're getting after that part of it first. That's not to say that's the only thing we're working on. We're still taking care of the trash and, fulfilling orders. But it's the way to focus our collective efforts on those 1, 2, maybe 3 most salient things to concentrate on. And then everything else can fill in behind that. So OKRs, again, there's a syntax and a structure that's meant to be more of a shorter term horizon, and it's meant to be the critical few. You cannot say like, yes, we have 748 objectives. That's just silliness. And it's not everything you're doing, right? It's what collectively we're saying is most important. And then anything else, maybe that's delegated to somebody else. Say, hey, you can take care of that. Maybe that's your OKR, but collectively for our team, that's not the most essential thing. So let's take a closer look at the syntax, just so you can work on your particular skills when you're trying to articulate it. OKRs is sometimes easy to learn, but hard to master. Again, it's very simple. It's just 2 parts. And it's created as 2 parts so that they're loosely correlated. They're delaminated, as it were, versus some other techniques out there like SMART goals and the like. They include all the similar ingredients, but they tend to paste them all together in one bundle. And that just makes them a little long and a little brittle. So by separating the qualitative directional objective from the detailed quantitative key results, or 1 or 2, you're able to really keep things succinct and be able to make them more resilient, because maybe the objective can last longer. The key results can change in a shorter time horizon, so you don't get too beat up there. So what I'd like to do is just take a closer look at some tips and tricks on how do you create them. And then also some things to look out for, so you don't go down the how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin type of a debate. So let's take a look at the syntax. An objective. You're asking the leader, hey, what matters most? Where are we going? These are some great questions to be able to invite, hey, given these trends, what's the most salient? What's the most important thing for us to work on? And as you start to distill that out, it's real easy to get caught up in the complexities of the situations and the specific. But if you really distill it down, there's basically 4 ingredients in a good objective. One of the ingredients is a strong action verb, something that really gives you the energy, the go juice to make it happen. The second element is, what is the aspect of the change or the system that you want to see changed that's most salient. And again, that's going to be as specific as you can based on your level of context. If you're leading a 5,000 employee organization, the level of detail that's going to be higher. If you're leading a 5 employee team, then the level of detail is going to be pretty granular. But what aspect are we focusing on? And then what's the outcome that we believe we will achieve or obtain by changing that aspect? And then for a customer, right? Who's going to benefit from this? Who's going to warrant or witness the impacts from those outcomes? So those are the 4 basic elements of an objective. Again, a clear, strong action verbs, usually 1 or 2. What aspect of the system are you focusing on? What is the outcome that you expect as a result of that? And then what's the customer? And this really relates back to, Stephen Covey's example of begin with the end in mind, right? So before you detail out what's first things first, you're beginning with the end in mind. Articulate the destination. And maybe we're not quite sure how we're going to get there. Maybe we don't know what the solution is. Maybe we don't know all the detailed plans, or maybe we do. But we're reminding ourselves of why we're doing this is to get to that location. Because what sometimes can happen is, you get this detailed plan, and then now we start measuring progress based on variance from the plan. Well, but if the conditions are changing, then the plan needs to vary. So it's okay to change the plan. What we want to do is validate that we're going after that outcome or that destination. So when you look at each one of those, a couple of tips to consider, and then there's a little bit of the sequencing that you can incorporate. So on those strong action verbs, when you look at objectives and they're written like, we want to analyze, we want to identify, we want to assess, we want to evaluate, we want to research. Those are all really weak verbs, you guys. Like, that's not putting a lot of gas in the tank, right? That's more of an activity. That's more of a very tepid and kind of like, yeah, we're going to kind of look and see. That is not a strong action verb. On the flip side, some verbs are so extreme that you're kind of painting yourself in a corner. So things like, we want to maximize, we want to eliminate, we want to dominate, we want to, things that are on the extreme end of kind of all or nothing. Very rarely can I see cases for those for most business examples. So strong action verbs are things, just starting with the basics: increase, decrease, improve, enhance, strengthen, accelerate. Those are strong verbs that are like, hey, we're putting a little juice in the tank for us to get after it. Then the second part, like I said, is the aspect of it that you're looking to change. So in any system, there's a lot of moving parts, but we know based on physics that in any given system, there's always one critical constraint. Depending on what outcome it is that you want. If your fundamental outcome is to make things faster, The critical constraint is the part that's going the slowest. If the outcome is to make it better or higher quality, then the outcome you want to focus on is that which is throwing the most defects. If it's something you want to lower the cost on it, well, it's the aspect that costs you the most, right? So the aspect is not saying like, I want to improve communications. That's too global, too nebulous. I want to improve the customer experience. That's too global. That's too nebulous. You want to look at what aspect of it. Okay, this particular part in the customer journey or this particular part of communications. So if you get those really fuzzy words, decompose those down and say, well, the communication is composed of 3 parts. All right, which of those parts are we focused on? The customer journey has 6 steps. Which of those steps are we focused on? So making that aspect of the change as specific as you can for your context is going to help give you greater focus, right? So you don't get distracted on all the ancillary things. And then once you achieve that, well, then you can go on to the next one and then the next one and the next one. So they're very recursive or iterative in terms of focus and concentrate your efforts in those specific weakest link or critical constraints and then iterate accordingly. So then the third component, which is arguably the most important in my opinion, is what's the outcome? What's the impact that you seek? So, don't tell us about the actions and the tasks you're going to take. Talk about what the outcome will be. And sometimes when you get stuck, you're like, oh, well, I want to document the process. And you're like, well, why? And it's like, well, because right now the process is being really done inconsistently. Oh, so what if we care about that? And it's like, well, it's really affecting the timeframes that our customers are experiencing with this particular service. And I was like, okay, well, do you want the time frame faster or shorter or just more predictable? What do you want? Right. So asking why 5 times, I like to joke, that's a technique that was patented by kindergartners, right? Ask why 5 times to get down to really what is the outcome that you seek. And generally they're going to fall into some flavor of faster, better, or cheaper. And those all have different permutations, but that like, what is it that you want to see actually different as a result of these efforts? And then for who? Who's the customer? Who's going to benefit from this? And sometimes it's the immediate customer. Sometimes it's an indirect or ultimate customer that's several steps down in the food chain. But I like to name who the customer is because if you're able to look at it through the eyes of the customers, it's easier sometimes to see the outcome. When you look at through the eyes of the engineer or the operator or the clinician or the technician, you tend to focus on the parts, right? You tend to focus on the steps and then assume that downstream there will be an outcome. So those are the 4 components of an objective. So let me give you an example of a weak one and then give you an example, maybe a stronger one. And I was doing a lot of work with some healthcare companies this last week. So I'll use that domain just because that's fresh in my mind off the field work that we've been doing. So we want to analyze the patient experience and evaluate where we might be able to make some improvements. Right. Like I see those types of things all the time. So it's like, and that is really tepid. Like I said, very anemic, very weak. You're like, what exactly? That's not even, we don't know what the outputs are, much less the outcomes versus something that says, okay, we want to address the patient registration process at the front end of their experience so we can immediately set them at ease before they begin the rest of their services for that visit. Okay, that's a little bit of a stronger objective, right? I'm saying I want to improve the registration component so it's more specific so that they can be set at ease for the rest of their hospital journey, right? Because we get off on the wrong foot with all this hassle and nonsense, then everything else after that just feels a step down. Now, I'm not saying that's what it should be. I'm just saying that's assuming the trends that you've looked at. And given that your mission says that you're going after that, that might be the most salient area to focus on. So being able to articulate, again, what's the specific aspect, describe why you're doing it, and for whom helps you get a better objective. Now, when you're stitching those components together, you kind of have 2 options. There's the chronological option that I think most folks use, and then there is the Yoda option, as I like to describe it. So the chronological objective says, all right, I want to improve this aspect of the patient, member, customer experience, right, to make it faster for them, or to get more reliable delivery of their product, or to be able to, enhance their impact with whatever they're doing their shampoo with or whatever the product happens to be, right? So it's the cause and effect, right? This is what we're going to do to the system and to cause this outcome. And that rolls off the tongue, and that's how most people's brains are wired. That's acceptable. That works. It gets it all in there. I like to go the Yoda method, which is even in the sentence, you begin with the end in mind. So the first words are what's the outcome you want to achieve, and then saying by, this particular focused area. So I want to reduce the turnaround time for our patients or our customers by targeting improvements in the registration process. Or I want to enhance or strengthen the community confidence around this particular capability by conducting more targeted outreach to our key partners, right? So you're putting the outcome more first, and then you're putting the key leverage point second. So those are your kind of two options. Again, chronological Yoda style, either of those will work, but that gives you some options in how you craft your objectives. So that's the objective side. So let's go to the key results. And okay, we specified a particular destination for a customer, and then we've named some aspect that we want to see changed. And again, a time horizon of maybe that's going to take 6 to 18 months, right? We're not trying to boil the ocean. It's not every part of the customer journey. It's not every part of the operational process, not every employee. It's some specific subset. So now we ask ourselves the Whitney Houston question: how will I know? Right? How will I be able to assess progress along the way? And to do that, I basically like to be able to extract out, first of all, what are the nouns and the objectives? Because nouns are things you count, right? So you're talking about the patient, you're talking about the experience, you're talking about registration. So those are all nouns. We can pull those out. And then I like to plot those in what's called a SIPOC, for those of you that are in the Lean Six Sigma world. But a SIPOC is just a real simple way of illustrating a system to say I've got suppliers or partners on the one side or requesters on the one side. They've got various inputs. Then I have our processes. Then I have my outputs. Then I have the customer. Then I have the outcome. Right. And so if I'm talking about a pre-registration for a hospital admission, right? Well, the requester is maybe the patient or their families, or maybe it's the EMTs that are bringing them in, right? Maybe I need the input is some medical history, try to pull up their medical records, find them in our EMR or whatnot. And then the process is, okay, I'm getting some demographic information, I'm getting their insurance information, I'm getting their close contact information, I'm connecting the system with their doctor and with their appointments, right? So that's all the activities that you're doing. And then the output is an admission record, a notification to the families, notification to the various providers that are going to provide support during this visit, right? And the customers are the patient, the families, the providers, the insurers, right? So on and so forth. So I can create this visual SIPOC, and then the outcomes are that, the right patient gets to the right doctor at the right time for the right treatment. And then the insurance, codes it correctly and is provide the right payment based on their coverage, or the family is not as stressed out. They know what to do to support it while their loved one is in this hospital. So those would be outcomes, right? Peace, accurate payment, quality care. Those are more on the outcome side versus the output, the notices, the admission records, things of that nature. So that's the SIPOC. And I've used that tool because if I take the few nouns that are in the objective, that kind of seeds that SIPOC, then I can fill in some of the other blanks, and now I can see lots of ways to measure it, right? I can measure stuff over here. I can measure stuff over here. I can measure the raw number of this one. I can measure the ratio of this versus that. How many patients are admitted within 30 seconds? How often do I get the insurance information right the first time? How satisfied are the family members with the notice that they got? There's now a plethora of things I can measure. And I'm saying, hey, as I'm changing this aspect, right, then that number should be different. It should go from X to Y. And that's what we call a continuous metric on a key result, where you're saying, all right, I want to take the turnaround time from 17 days to 10 days. I want to take the average patient satisfaction from 3.7 to 3.9, or I'm going to go from 80% of folks are satisfied on a scale of 1 to 5 to 83% are satisfied on a scale of 1 to 5. I want to go from this average cost per unit to this average cost per unit. Those are all key results then that show some kind of incremental progress. So we set the objective, right? We want to change this aspect for this outcome for this customer. And then I can link to that a key result that says, hey, this is an indicator that we're on the right path and that we're barking up the right tree. 3 months goes by, we're checking in along the way. Now we're doing all of our project plans and our action items, and we're making progress. So with that, I can have a clear, concise, but still simple objective, right? Improve this aspect for this outcome for this customer. That's short. That's like barely a sentence. And then I can say, okay, here is 1 or 2 indicators that we can track progress along the way. Now, you get some folks who get kind of caught up and say, well, no, you can only measure the outcome with key results. If you're not measuring the outcomes, you're not doing it right. Well, the trick is depending on how you define your context, the outcome to one thing is an input to another thing, right? And so I like to look at, again, who's the customer? What is the outcome for them? The customer could be an internal group. You could be improving engagement of your internal employees. You could be improving the trust with a key strategic partner. You could be improving the delivery of your input to somebody else's process so that they can get the output to the ultimate customer. So you got to define your context to say, okay, hey, what is the boundaries of this system, right? And then the outcomes are going to be, closer to the, what the customer is experiencing. That being said, we're doing this in 3-month cycles. So sometimes the things that you do, it may take a year or 2 or 3 for the results to show up. And I can't steer my car with the 3-year lag time. So I might choose a more of a leading indicator that I get much faster that maybe is measuring an input or an activity or an output, not necessarily the ultimate outcome just because of that lag time, right? It's like, okay, and I have a confidence that this indicator is highly correlated with that outcome. So that kind of lets me know we're barking up the right tree. But the nice thing about objectives is, again, they're very dynamic. They're not meant to be forever. So I get after it for a quarter. I reassess. Yes, the still objective is still the right thing for us to do. So then we measure again, and then we're seeing that incremental improvements over time. I'll throw one other type of key result out there that sometimes you run into. Some things are kind of just one and done. It's only temporal in its impact. So it's not like it's a continuous measure like a percent satisfaction or average turnaround time or number of employees that do such and such behavior. So there's a particular event that needs to occur for 100 people, or there's a particular launch window that you need to meet, or there's a particular binary, did it happen or did it not type of scenario. And so those can be referred to as a milestone key result. You got to be careful with those because sometimes people will use and abuse those, saying that now just a glorified task checklist, right? Did you do the analysis? Did you do the interviews, right? You got to bring it up to something that's a congruence of multiple efforts that happen to make something material. So maybe presenting to a governing body or an advisory board or your board of directors, or, having the launch of a new product or landing a particular new customer, or bringing online a new business capability, right? The go lives for those types of things, right? That's a lot of tasks are converging for that magical thing to happen, which then sets you up to have a new service or an enhanced service, or a new customer and a new employee. So those are milestone key results, and those do have their time in place. So it's like, hey, we need to achieve this major thing by the end of this quarter. My preference is maybe use those when you're starting up something new or you don't have some of the sophistication, but you're trying to evolve into having more continuous measures as soon as you can. So now with that new customer, all right, well, how many orders has that customer had? How satisfied are they on average with their customers? How many referrals are you getting from that customer? Those are things that can go from a milestone binary yes or no to more of a continuous run. So those are some tips and tricks for being able to define objectives and key results. Key results get way more intimate. There's some math involved. There's lots of tips and tricks. We could spend on an episode just on that aspect. So we might do that again in the future. But as a technique, you're a leader, teams look in you, there's a million things going on. How do I provide a signal that's to focus? And I might say, guys, right now at this time in our journey, what's most essential is that we close this particular deal, or what's most essential is we make a fundamental change in how we do this part of our business, or what's most essential is bringing this particular group of employees up to the next level so they in turn can serve our customers. So it's being able to signal that, and the objective would say, hey, we want to enhance this outcome by making a targeted difference in this area. And the way we'll know is by the average number of this or the total number of that as a result. And it's just a way of being able to quantify that so we can look back and say, yeah, we're on the right path, or no, we're barking up the wrong tree. It's a very simple and dynamic and powerful tool. And then on a quarterly basis, we can refresh it, right? The things that maybe are the highest and most important this quarter, may not need to be the highest and most important next quarter. So it allows us to also signal shifts in emphasis and areas of importance. Hopefully this has demystified a little bit of what it means to create an effective OKR and when you might want to use one of those. For our last episode in this 4-step cycle, we're going to switch gears now from how do I tell the story? How do I use the tools of the trends, the missions, OKRs, or other tools that you have at in your goal setting vocabulary to be able to tell 3 powerful stories that will resonate with the audiences that you need as a leader? So stay tuned. Looking forward to wrapping up this series. We've got a bunch of great guest episodes that we recorded over the last month and a half that I cannot wait to share with you. So let's get these out to you and keep leading, keep loving, and keep making a difference in your communities.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.